Hi everyone, my name is Quentin and joining me today are my co-hosts Raoul and Emir. In this podcast, we will be discussing modern iconoclasm. We are making this podcast for an assignment that we have to make for school. We are going to talk about the ins and outs of our research that we have done about certain ongoing topics in the world that have a colonial past or a past that has something to do with slavery. But first, we're going to have to talk about modern iconoclasm actually is and what examples we use to research this. Raoul, can you give us some background information?
Yes, of course. For the past month, we've been researching the removal of statues in the West. We've looked into the statues representing uh, our colonial past. I came up with the title Modern Iconoclasm, which stands for the removal of statues. The name comes from the iconoclastic fury in the Netherlands, where uh, statues of Mary were removed in the Catholic churches.
I think that the listeners are clear about the topic that we are discussing. That means that we can dive into the first example that we used. First of all, we have the Netherlands. Since it's the closest to us, it's the easiest to explain. In Rotterdam, there is a street called Witte de Witstraat. It is named after the Dutch VOC admiral, Witte de Wit. He fought in many wars in which he was quite successful. No wonder he had a whole street named after him. He was born on the 29th of March 1599 during the 80-year War between the Dutch Republic and the Spanish Empire. After he did some minor jobs, he went on a voyage to the East Indies, and from there he moved up the ladder and became an admiral. He was honored with a lot of things. He has an art center for contemporary art in Rotterdam named after him. He has a street named after him where a lot of important art from Rotterdam is located. And Raoul is going to explain what is going on in Rotterdam with Witte de Wit. And why does that name get so much attention and critique? And why did the Witte de Wit Center of Contemporary Art change its name to Kunstinstituut Melly?
Witte de Witstraat, located in Rotterdam, has been the center of controversy surrounding the street's name. De, de Wit was a Dutch naval officer with a complex history. The controversy arises from de Wit's involvement in Dutch colonial enterprises, particularly in the Dutch East Indies, where he participated in campaigns against indigenous populations and rival colonial powers. People argue that his actions in the part of the Dutch colonial expansion involved violence, exploitation, and the subjugation of indigenous people. Activists and community members have called for a re-evaluation of public spaces, including street names, statues, and monuments, to reflect on a more inclusive and diverse representation of Dutch history. Recently, there has been a lot of calls to rename the street due to his controversial actions during the colonial times. However, renaming streets or removing monuments associated with colonial figures often sparks contagious debates, with some arguing that it is erasing or rewriting of Dutch histories. Others argue that renaming such spaces is an essential step towards acknowledging past injustices and promoting a more inclusive and just society in the Netherlands.
Moving across the globe to the UK, we have the case of Cecil Rhodes. This guy was a lot worse than Witte de Wit. Born the 5th of July 1853, son of an important Christian clergy, this guy went on a full rampage. He was raised strictly religious. Strict like his parents would beat him if he didn't say his prayers right. He was 18 when he joined the EIC, the East India Company of the British Empire. He had a brother who also joined him to become part of the Cape Colony. The colony was established in South Africa by the British East India Company workers that worked together with the Dutch one, the VOC. Rhodes was Prime Minister of the Cape Colony for 6 whole years, in which he introduced a lot of treaties that were in favor of the minorities at the time and were against the majority, the people of color. Not only did Cape Town fall under Rhodes' power, this guy owned the land of nations that are now called Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. At that time, they were called Rhodesia. Countries where after Rhodes' passing major wars took place. Countries that became independent only in 1979. That is so recent. Rhodes also owned a big island group in Oceania, which is still called the Rhodes Island. An island group which were and still are rich in spices. Freemason was then which was then full of slaves owned by, you know it, Cecil Rhodes. The power that this guy had was insane. He would set up schools only for the civilized white. The British at the time thought that their way of doing things was superior. Not only in India did they abolish the rights of natives, because it was too cruel, they did it everywhere they went. Meanwhile, the schools that Rhodes has established have been open to everyone no matter the color of their skin for a few decades, which has been a major progress, partly thanks to Mandela's African National Congress Party. Of course, all this cruelty brings some critique with it. Fortunately, Emir can tell us more about this.
Certainly, Quentin. The debate surrounding the Cecil Rhodes statue at the Oriel College, University of Oxford has gained significant traction. Critics argue that the statue glorifies a figure associated with British imperialism and racism. The reason, the reason for his statue is actually very positive. Rhodes is the one that established the Rhodes Scholarships. These scholarships are considered to be one of the best scholarships in the world. In 2015, the Rhodes Must Fall campaign, or short for RMF, was established, with its goal being the removal of all Cecil Rhodes statues. Oxford Union, a private student debating club located in the city of Oxford, voted in 2016 245 to 212 in favor of removing the Cecil Rhodes statue. 10 days later, it was announced by the college that the statue would remain. Instead of removing the statue, Oriel College installed a plaque giving a description that says the following: committed British colonialist, obtained his fortune through exploitation of minerals, land and peoples of Southern Africa. Some of his activities led to great loss of life and attracted criticism in his day and ever since. The ongoing discussions and protests have sparked a wider conversations about the decolonization of educational purposes of educational spaces.
Yeah, that's about right. The critic is not only in the UK, though. It's also in South Africa, the place he used to rule for many years. In 1904, 2 years after Rhodes died, the Cecil Rhodes University was established, thanks to a gift from Rhodes himself. They named the school after him, honoring Cecil and thanking him after his death.
Next on our list is J.P. Koen, Jan Pieterszoon Koen. Raoul, can you provide us with an update on the discussions surrounding the statue of Jan Pieterszoon Koen?
Of course, the Jeppe Koen statue in Hoorn is a statue of J.P. Koen, who was a man who lived during the 16th and 17th century. He became famous for being the governor of the Dutch VOC, the Dutch East India Company. He expanded the Dutch influence in the colonies in Indonesia. But he is controversial nowadays because after a group of Indonesians on the island of Banda rejected his offer to sell him cheap nutmeg, he decided to kill off 2/3 of the island. In total, around 2,000 or 3,000 people died because of him, and he enslaved the rest. Nowadays, people have mixed feelings about him. Some see him as a great governor who made some questionable decisions, but should not only be remembered for that. Others, mainly activists or people who are on the left side of the political spectrum, find the statues of him outdated and disgusting, and that they should be removed.
Moving to the UK again, Edward Colston's statue in Bristol has been a focal point for iconoclastic actions. Born on the 2nd of November 1636, the Englishman played a major part in the British slave trade with the Africans and the Native Americans. Raoul, what can you tell us about the aftermath of his removal?
Well, Edward Colston's statue was pulled down during a Black Lives Matter protest in the city of Bristol. It sparked debate about the ways in which society commemorates historical figures linked to the slave trade. Edward Colston was a slave trader in the 17th century trading, who apart from trading in slaves, also traded in gold and diamonds. He got these resources out of the coast of Africa. So that's why became controversial, because he was a major uh, trader in colonial possessions. The removal of his statues prompted discussion about who gets to decide how history is remembered and which figures should be celebrated. The statue was removed, but after that, in a form of protest, they also placed a statue of a Black Lives Matter demonstrator.
Our next case takes us to Captain Cook. He was a big explorer and colonizer, Admiral of the Royal Society of the United Kingdom, and later on a great ruler and captain in the Royal Navy. Raoul, what have we uncovered regarding the iconoclasm surrounding Captain Cook?
Well, Captain James Cook's statues, particularly in Australia, have faced controversy because of his role in the colonial expansion. He became famous for his voyages and explorations and discovery in the Pacific Ocean during the 18th century. Because of his exploration, Great Britain started its colonization and subjugation of the Pacific islands in the Pacific Ocean, which is why indigenous communities argue that the man is not to be celebrated, and that it should be removed or replaced. It was vandalized multiple times also during Australia Day. But it's a bit ironic that a man who's known for his humane treatment of his crewmen was vandalized with graffiti saying, "No pride in genocide."
And finally, not a person, but a whole street, the Nootmuskaatstraat in the Netherlands, a street in Amsterdam which had a lot of critique because of its name. Since nutmeg came from an island which J.P. Koen, yeah, he burned it down to the ground. Emir, could you provide some insights into the ongoing discussion around this particular street?
Noot-Muskaatstraat in Amsterdam has been at the center of debates over colonial history and street names associated with the Dutch East India Company. Noot-Muskaatstraat is a Dutch name that translates to "Nutmeg Street". Nutmeg was a highly prized spice during the colonial period, particularly in the East Indies, where the Dutch East India Company had significant control over the nutmeg trade. This control involved exploitation, forced labor, and other forms of oppression against the indigenous populations. The questioning of these names reflects a broader desire to reconsider how we commemorate historical figures and events tied to colonialism.
So, can we say that we share the idea of still honoring these historical figures without ruining their statues?
I mean, I think that it could be true. I mean, these guys were nothing strange for the time, right?
But still, what they did was wrong, and what the people are doing now is completely in their right.
Yeah, that is also true, but I don't know if that is the right thing to do after hundreds of years after these things happen. I don't know if these statues are affecting anything that happens in present day. You just walk by them and don't really pay any respect.
I think that people are just fed up with the principles of these statues. Honoring these people is might be the people that vandalize the statues don't want these actions that they have done, brutally murdering and suppressing innocent people, to be uplifted. They're often upset, or they themselves have a ethnicity like being from Ghana or Nigeria, for example, who were targeted by the colonization.
Yeah, uh, yeah, that is true. But cruelly speaking, the Dutch look at the Dutch and the British, for example. Uh, the Dutch are pretty wealthy and have one of the best healthcare systems in the world, and the British are really influential in the world economy. And they were the first that had an industrial revolution, which was pretty world changing.
Yeah, that's true, and I agree with it.
Yeah, me too.
But to wrap up today's episode, it's evident that modern iconoclasm movement is reshaping the way we see historical figures and monuments in the West. We think you should always look at the historical figures within the context of the time and the place. That's why it's important to always do your research about these historical figures before judging on him based on maybe one thing he did, like the Epeku. Especially when it comes to slave traders, we've to discuss uh, we've discussed we must realize that during the time period slavery was a totally normal and accepted thing and nothing weird.
Thank you, Raoul, and thank you all for joining us on Modern Iconoclasm. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep the conversation alive.